even at the level of governor, someone who was on the street, and was very befitting and appropriate service for her.
You know, it's interesting because when I first met her, and she was lieutenant governor, and before that she was a state representative for, what, 10 years?
Yep.
You know, I don't think that she had aspirations necessarily to be governor, and may not have been if Governor John Rowland had not gotten into trouble with corruption and had to resign. So it was thrust upon her in a way, but she really rose to the occasion, I think, and played a very critical role in helping the state restore some of the confidence that it may have lost in government.
Yes, she did. She did. She had that real calming approach to her, right? And I've said it many times yesterday, and since we've heard of this tragic news, is that she could walk into a room, and I had been there with her, where there are 2 people or 2,000 people, and there was a thing about her where people felt very comfortable in being able to approach her, to speak to her, to feel that they were being listened to. And you know, as you mentioned earlier, I think one of the reasons people really went to say thank you to Governor Rell yesterday and throughout the week that she's passed is because that's something you don't see in government and government officials anymore. There's a sense of that we know what's best for you. And as much as Jodi may have felt she did, she took the time to listen and to approach people and to say, hey, what do you think of this? Tell me what your thoughts are. And she executed on that.
She really did listen, and I think also had some strong beliefs. She signed civil unions into law at the time when she was governor, and you were lieutenant governor, and that was not very popular amongst some lawmakers, particularly Republicans. But Jodi Rell felt that it was the right thing to do, and I think that may set her apart from other politicians, especially now when we're so party-driven.
Yeah, absolutely. Particularly as you said, as Republicans, right? Civil unions was not an agenda that Republicans had or do push. You know, funding of campaigns with taxpayer money is not a Republican agenda item. But yet, you know, she felt these were very important issues to our citizens, and based on what we had gone through here in the state, and she worked hard to make sure that agenda was passed and got implemented here in the state.
It's really a rare honor also to lie in state at the state capitol. I don't think in recent history, other than former Governor Ella Grasso, anyone else has had that honor. I know it's something.
We had one speaker.
Correct, a speaker. Nelson Brown.
Right, Nelson, right, correct.
Nelson Brown, who was a lobbyist, I guess, after for many years and was very involved in the Capitol. But it really, truly is an honor. And I think, you know, some people had said, well, you know, what is the purpose of it? But I see it more as symbolic, not as only as a way to give people a chance to say goodbye and pay their respect, but also at a time when we're so divisive that it shows that people can come together, especially in that kind of a moment.
And you know, it's interesting you know, when you talked about her going from lieutenant governor to governor, it wasn't something she had planned, but in her feeling when she became governor, what was the first thing she did? Let me introduce myself to the people of Connecticut. As much as she had been in government, lieutenant governors, as you know, are usually kind of in the background. You know, they work for the governor, they work in the legislature. They're not the people up front, it's the governor. So she took the time to say, hey, come in, let me welcome you to your capital and say hi. And you get to know who I am, I get to know who you are. She did that. And how fitting is it that as she leaves us, she does it at the same place she said hello.
We heard so many warm stories yesterday inside the Cathedral of St. Joseph about how, I think one of the stories Lamont told about how he heard that she one day brought lunch for a trooper who was driving her around. I also heard from the current commissioner for the Connecticut State Police that apparently one day someone hit her car in an accident and then realized that she had hit the governor's car, and she was crying, and apparently Jodi Rell got out of her car to console this woman. And I'm not surprised by it, and you're not, because you know the type of person that she was. But
Absolutely.
that just doesn't really happen all that much in politics. She showed a very human side, I think, to herself, and that was really wonderful.
Yeah, and again, so sorely needed in this world today. We everybody puts blame on, who didn't do this and who did that, and Jodi really, kind of said, okay, we have a problem. Let's, I think as her daughter said, let's wait 2 minutes, let's catch our breath, square our shoulders, and let's address it. And that was her approach to things, and it worked. It worked. She was able to reach across the aisle on many of her agenda items and get them passed. She, in all of the pomp that surrounds the governor and what goes with it, she was just Jodi. People felt. I remember going into places with her, conventions and meetings and things, and people would forget she was governor, just say, "Hi, Jodi, how are you?" And we heard yesterday when she did the governor's Christmas showing at the governor's mansion. After she had left off, she still enjoyed doing that. And people would come up and call her governor, and she'd say, "No, I'm Jodi." That's who she was. And it's interesting. She was that in public. She was that in private. That was not a facade or an air that she put on. That was just who she was.
Yes, I know the governor invited her for many years to come to the residence for holidays, and she also came to the press parties, the Capitol Press Corps,
Right.
which I'm a member of, and she would come, and I saw her last year, and I remember just being really excited about it, that she came, and how nice it was that, she just wanted to be there and hang out with people, and not in that former governor role, really, almost as we got to know each other, and she enjoyed people's company. Sounds like you really enjoyed being her lieutenant governor.
I did, because it's interesting, and I said this the other day to someone, when we interviewed, or I interviewed for the verbal interview with her at the governor's residence about possibly being chosen as lieutenant governor, because she was talking to other folks. She asked me, some qualities and what I was interested in doing. And, again, I think, as you know, I wasn't a ceremonial lieutenant governor. I worked, came to the Capitol every day, not only in the legislature, but in agendas like in business and things of that nature that were important not only to the governor, but to me. And she gave that leeway back and forth. She'd listen. She would add advice. She would help direct at times, and she gave me an opportunity of a lifetime. I mean, if you look at my 10 years of my legislative career, I did my job. I represented my district and my constituents, and then came back home where I was, and then got the call from Governor Rell about, hey, would you might be interested in this, and I was truly honored and humbled that she thought that I would fit in her administration, being able to help her move her agenda forward. And I truly think, when I think back at what her qualities were when she was lieutenant governor and in the legislature, understanding the legislature, being able to work across the aisle with the other side, getting things done, concerned about the citizens of Connecticut. Those were traits that she was looking for in my resume, and I was so happy that I was able to fulfill those for her.
And it was during a difficult time, right? Much different financial situation than there was now. I mean, you were faced with budget cuts and serious decisions, and yet she did it, with conviction, but also in a way that she could get people together to talk about it and figure out a plan.
Yeah, and if you think about it, not only was it a difficult time, we were never in the majority. We were always, Republicans were in the minority. Yes, we had the executive chambers, but in the Senate and in the House, we were in the minority. So how do you pass your agenda? How do you get things done? And I think that was Jodi Rell. Jodi Rell working across the aisles, working with the senior leadership of both sides in trying to craft what it was that was best for our state.
Yesterday, someone called her the accidental governor, right? Which sounds different, I guess, but it's true. But in fairness, I mean, after she served her term, finished out John Rowland's term, she ran on her own and won. And when she decided not to run, she had about an 80% approval rating. And I think I asked you yesterday if you were surprised that someone with that strong of a likability would just say, I don't want to run again.
Yeah, but again, that was Jodi Rell. This was not, I call it a chapter and verse for us. We're here for a period of time. We do our job and we move on. And she was ready to go back home to her grandchildren, as you heard yesterday, and to her family, and to Lou. her husband, who at the time was still alive, and then subsequently a few years later passed away. That was Jodi Rell. Most politicians, probably myself included, with an 80% popularity rating, would have run again.
Sure.
I mean, that's wonderful. I think it's the highest ever of any governor in this state ever. But she had put a lot of time in, and we forget how much time we are away from our families, particularly when you're in the legislature, but even more demanding when you're in the governor's office. Even in my own small legislative career, when I had up my municipal legislative and governor's office, it's 18 years, and that's a lot of time. And she obviously did more time than I did, and I think she was ready. She was tired. She had accomplished key legislation that she wanted to get done, and she was ready to go back home and be Jodi.
Right, and I think even though she may have considered herself a politician in some way, she was also many other things. She was a human being. She was a mother. She was a grandmother. I know she was so proud of her grandchildren. So I think that the role as governor did not define her. She saw many other things, right?
Yeah, and absolutely. And those top items that you listed were her number one priority. Yes, she was governor, and politics were important, but all those other things were so important to her. I remember, just spending time with her, and when her grandchildren were around, when we were campaigning, we did actually in my home. We filmed her grandson Tyler, who I think was the only grandson at the time in 2006, in my kitchen, and I met him yesterday, and he's 16 years old now. So it was so important that they were part of who she was, and I just think that's the woman she was. She had a title, she had a role to do, a job to do. She did that job, she did it well. But at the end of the day, she was who she was, and you heard that throughout yesterday, and from the ministers, from her church, from everyone. Just that she just was so unassuming. She just walked in, she did what she had to do, and she left. There was no airs about her. There was no pomp. No trumpets blowing and fireworks going off. She was just Jodi.
And speaking of politics, really, I mean, you can't not recognize how many politicians and lawmakers there were yesterday from all parties, Republicans, Democrats, people who had served with her in the legislature, which really is a testament to her that she was able to work across the aisle and not just be partisan when it came to certain issues.
Yeah, she definitely was, and she was always very fair and balanced, even in situations and conversations that we had. Right there, again, I would love to say we agreed all the time. We didn't, and and she would state her case. She would allow me to state mine, and sometimes she would say, what, I didn't hear it that way, but that's great. Let's take a look at that, and vice versa. I would say, oh, that's an interesting perspective, because again, she had a lot of more experience in that process than I did, but more importantly, she brought a different view, a more personal view sometimes that maybe I didn't have, and was able to balance that decision out. So she was very fair and balanced, and I think you saw that in with legislators and people who worked with her, that occurred. Nowadays, you've got people just banging their fists on the desk saying this is the way it's going to be. And remember, we weren't in the majority ever. So we had to work with people in order to get things done.
We have a few minutes left, but I wanted to ask you about John Rowland. I saw him come into the church yesterday, and I believe you sat next to him. He felt it was important to come. Did you speak with him?
I did. John was sat behind me in the second pew, and I wasn't surprised to see John there. John obviously had his challenges and issues, but I believe John respected Jodi and knew the kind of governor she was and the kind of person she was. And obviously he picked her to be his lieutenant governor for 2 terms, 2.5 terms, basically, that they were together. That's a long time, 10 years, I believe. So I wasn't surprised, because I do believe deep down inside John's a good person who just unfortunately, had some challenges and issues that he faced, and unfortunately didn't play well for him. But I kudos to him to put that all aside and be able to be there with everyone in public, to be able to say, thank you, Jodi, for not only what you did for me when I was governor and in my political career, but also what you did for our state and the people in our state.
Right. And it was a big deal in Connecticut. I mean, for a governor to be indicted and go to prison and then again twice, you know, that was a black eye for our state. And it really took a lot to kind of restore people's trust in government again. And many think that Jodi Rell helped do that.
Yep, she absolutely did. She was that steady hand, you know, when this all broke, and she had to take control of the state as governor. She basically said, you know, again, okay, 2 minutes, square your shoulders, take a deep breath. Let's grab the steering wheel. It's okay. I've got it. We'll be all right. And she did. She basically did. It's what we needed at the time, and quite frankly, what we needed for that whole period as we went into a recession, a very difficult time in our economy.
Well, I wanted to wrap things up, but I wanted you to leave our listeners with some words of maybe wisdom or advice about, you know, about politicians, especially now, you know, when everybody is so divisive and angry, and she was able to bring people together. And what should people take away from her experience, and what can we learn from that?
Well, I think what you can learn, if you learn anything from Governor Rell's passing, is the kind of person she was. And she was a person. She wasn't a politician. And that's the distinguished difference. The politician is looking at, where do I go next? And what do I do to go next, to that next level? Governor Rell was a person who said, what do I do to help people? And oh, by the way, if that helps me go on to some other thing, fine. But if not, I'm happy with who I am. She was very happy with who she was, and we so sorely are missing that. And unfortunately, you know, it's within our own state of Connecticut. I remember I was telling someone the other day when I was in the legislature, and we would debate bills. And Susan, you've been in there for hours, and you would think that the proponents of the bill and the people against it were ready to come to blows, and we'd vote the bill up or down, and then at the end walk out and have a beer. Today. And again, I'm not demeaning social media, but when that happens, the next thing you know, there's a zillion negative things about you on social media, and it's not the way it used to be. I think what we have to learn to do, and one of the things we can understand from Governor Rell, is we can respectfully disagree and yet still work for a common goal.
I think you're right about that. I think in many ways the connections and the relationships have diminished. I was speaking to Don Williams yesterday and Chris Donovan, another House Speaker. And at the end of the day, Republicans and Democrats disagreed. There were some sparks, but they put their arms around each other and walked away and felt good about at least they had a dialogue about something. But I think that's disappeared. And I think maybe the pandemic also played a role in that, because everything was remote and they weren't there anymore and having those connections. But I think you're right about that. We don't see that anymore. And I think it would be nice to have some of that back.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And, you know, we can blame the pandemic for so long. It's been a while now. It's time to really regroup and really say, you know, do we want to interact? You know, do we want to continue to work through keyboards and screens, or do we really want to be in a room and work together to do what's best for our state?
Well, I hope you're right, and I hope that you know, we can all work together in a better way. And I think Jodi Rell would have wanted that. Her death was very sudden. And I know her son, Michael, was really devastated by it. He also has been a public servant most of his life, right? He was the mayor of Wethersfield. They're a wonderful family, and you've been wonderful to come on and share some really good thoughts and memories about Jodi Rell, and I want to thank you for joining us on Real Talk.
Well, Susan, thank you for inviting me on today, and for allowing me to share my thoughts and feelings about an incredible woman who gave me an incredible opportunity, who I will never forget.
Well, thank you, Michael Fidele, former Lieutenant Governor under former Governor Jodi Rell. Thank you so much for joining us on Real Talk, and we're going to say goodbye for now, and we will be back soon. So thanks again for joining us here on Real Talk.